5 years of marriage should have felt like a triumph, a quiet milestone worth celebrating with laughter, a glass of wine, and the comfort of knowing we had built something together. That evening, Eric and I sat across from each other in a cozy cafe tucked away on a rainy Seattle street. The city outside was blurred by mist and drizzle, neon lights reflecting in puddles that trembled each time a car passed. Inside, the cafe glowed warm, the air scented with coffee and pastries. It should have been romantic. It should have been ours. And then she spoke. Across the table, her red lips curved into a smile that made my stomach twist. Cassandra Reed, Cassie, as she insisted everyone call her, leaned forward, her manicured fingers resting lightly on the table as though she were about to deliver a toast. Her words dropped like stones into the silence. I want you to give me your husband. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The cafe's hum dimmed around me, the clinking cups and low conversations fading until there was only her voice echoing in my head. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Surely Eric would laugh, dismiss it as the cruel joke it was, maybe even be outraged. Surely he would say something, anything, but he didn't. Eric just sat there, eyes on me, calm and unreadable, as if the outrageous request were nothing more than someone asking to borrow a pen. His silence cut deeper than any words could have. I searched his face for anger, for humor, for loyalty, for something, but there was nothing. The world tilted. I forced a smile, brittle and empty, and whispered, "Take him." "Sorry, there's no wrapping paper. You'll have to manage without." My voice didn't sound like mine. It was detached, hollow, as though I had stepped outside myself to watch a stranger hand her life away. I stood, the chair scraping the floor, and walked out before the tears betrayed me. Out into the cold, wet night where the rain mingled with the hot sting in my eyes. Behind me, the cafe door closed, muffling the laughter that might have resumed at that table. Laughter at my expense. That was the moment I knew something had shattered. And yet, as I stepped into the rain, I also knew this moment hadn't come out of nowhere. Cassie's audacity, Eric's indifference, my own stunned silence. It had all been years in the making. The cracks had been there, hairline fractures running through what I thought was a strong foundation. Maybe I should have seen it earlier. Maybe I should have recognized the warning signs. But love has a way of painting over cracks, convincing you that the house you live in is unbreakable, until one day it isn't. So before I tell you what happened after that night, I need to tell you how it all began. How Eric and I met, how we built our life, how Cassie returned from nowhere and slipped into our world like poison disguised as perfume. Because nothing about that shocking request was truly sudden. It was the inevitable end to a story I hadn't realized was already unraveling. When I think back to the beginning, it almost feels like another life. Eric and I met in college, 2 kids balancing textbooks and part-time jobs, sharing late-night coffees at the library and whispered dreams about the future. He had that quiet confidence that drew people in, and I had the kind of naive faith that believed love could carry us through anything. We weren't rich, we weren't powerful, but we had each other, and in those years that felt like enough. We graduated together, still hand in hand, and when most of our friends scattered to new cities chasing careers, we stayed in Seattle. We found comfort in the rain, the evergreen trees, the steady rhythm of a city that was never too loud, never too quiet. We dreamed of a place to call our own, not just a rented apartment with peeling paint and someone else's memories. My mother suggested we live in the small condo she still owned from when my father was alive. It would have been easier, cheaper, safer. But Eric had shaken his head, his hand warm around mine. "No," he said softly. "We'll buy our own. We'll build everything from the ground up. Our life, our rules." And so we did. We found a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. I can still remember the day we signed the mortgage papers, my heart pounding with both pride and fear. The debt was heavy, almost suffocating, but it was the kind of weight that came with hope. We moved in with second-hand furniture and a mattress. We dragged up 2 flights of stairs ourselves, laughing until we collapsed, sweaty and happy on the bare floor. We promised ourselves one thing: no children until the mortgage was nearly paid. It sounded practical, responsible, and at the time, it felt like we were making smart choices. We would build financial stability first, then bring a baby into a safe, secure world. I used to daydream about the nursery, sunlight pouring through the window, soft blankets folded neatly on the crib. But we kept reminding each other, not yet. Let's finish paying it off first. Those years passed quickly. We worked hard, sometimes too hard, but every month we chipped away at the loan. Each payment felt like proof that we were doing it together. 5 years into our marriage, the apartment was nearly ours. We would talk about it in bed at night, how close we were to freedom, how soon we could start a family. I'd rest my head on Eric's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and think there was no safer place in the world. Looking back now, I realize how fragile that peace truly was. At the time, though, life felt solid. I would come home after work to the smell of Eric's cooking, or sometimes he'd come home to me trying out a new recipe, the two of us laughing at my clumsy mistakes. On weekends, we'd walk hand in hand through Pike Place Market, picking out fresh flowers or sipping coffee by the water. It was ordinary, but it was ours. We thought we had laid down strong foundations. We thought love, hard work, and shared dreams would keep the storms away. For 5 years, it seemed to be working. The apartment stood as our monument, a reminder that we had built something from nothing, that together we could overcome anything. But monuments can crack, even the ones you think will last forever. And ours had already begun to crumble, even if I couldn't see it yet. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind Seattle is famous for. I had stopped by a small boutique downtown to pick up a gift for my mother's birthday when I heard a voice behind me, sharp and confident, the kind that makes people turn their heads. "Autumn Morgan? Is that really you?" I turned, and there she was, Cassandra Reed. Cassie. We had gone to high school together, though back then she had been just another girl in our graduating class. Now she looked transformed. Her hair was sleek, her makeup flawless, her clothes expensive enough to make the sales associate rush over with a smile. She carried herself with the kind of ease that only comes from money and attention. "Cassie," I said, trying to hide my surprise. "It's been years." She laughed, tossing her hair back. 3 ex-husbands, 2 trips to Europe, and I'm just getting started. I'm opening a salon, something high-end, not like those cheap chains. You'll have to come by once it's ready. I'll make you look like a new woman." I smiled politely, but before I could respond, she gave me a slow once-over, her lips curving into something between amusement and pity. "You know, Autumn, you don't really take care of yourself, do you? You've always relied too much on your youth and natural looks. That won't last forever, sweetheart." The word stung, though I tried not to let it show. I straightened my posture, forcing a laugh as though it were nothing more than friendly banter. But inside I felt suddenly small, as if the simple life I had been so proud of was something to be ashamed of in her eyes. Cassie, of course, didn't notice or didn't care. She went on about her salon, her connections, the men who still chased her despite her history. She spoke with such confidence, as though the world had bent itself to her will. I nodded, offering polite comments when I could, waiting for the moment when I could excuse myself. At the register, as I paid for my mother's gift, she leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. "Give me your number. We should catch up properly. It'll be fun." I hesitated for a second too long, but in the end, I handed it over. It felt rude not to. After all, what harm could it do? Old classmates meet again, share a coffee, maybe laugh about the past. Nothing more. She smiled, her teeth white and perfect. "Perfect. I'll call you soon." As I walked back into the drizzle, clutching the small shopping bag to my chest, I shook off the strange feeling her words had left behind. Cassie was bold, brash, maybe even a little cruel, but she was just passing through my life. At least, that's what I told myself. What I didn't know then was that this chance encounter wasn't harmless at all. It was the first crack in the walls of my marriage, the beginning of something that would grow like poison until it consumed everything I thought I could trust. At first, it was little things, harmless, or so I tried to convince myself. Cassie called me a few days after our reunion, insisting we get together. I suggested meeting at a cafe downtown, but she laughed lightly, almost dismissively. "Why don't I come over? I'll bring dinner. You two deserve a treat." And so she did. That evening, she showed up at our apartment with glossy shopping bags filled with gourmet food and bottles of wine that probably cost more than our entire grocery budget for a week. She swept in like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her perfume filling every corner. She draped her coat over a chair without asking, set the table as though it were her own, and within minutes had turned what should have been a quiet meal between Eric and me into something else entirely. She laughed loudly, clinking her glass against Eric's, telling stories about her travels and her ex-husbands, all with an air of theatrical drama. Eric seemed captivated, his eyes following her, his laughter louder than I had heard in months. I sat there, smiling weakly, feeling like a guest in my own home. From then on, she came often. Sometimes she called first, sometimes she didn't. Always with some excuse. Leftover pastries from a bakery she knew, a new recipe she wanted to try, a dress she wanted to show me. And every time, the atmosphere in our apartment shifted. What used to be our dinners, simple meals where Eric and I caught up about work and shared quiet jokes, turned into stage performances, with Cassie as the star. She would toss her hair back, lean across the table, her voice syrupy sweet. "Eric, honey, could you pass me the wine?" Or, "Eric, you're so good with the grill. You should come help me in the kitchen sometime." The first time she called him that, "Eric, honey," something twisted in my chest. It was too familiar, too intimate. I caught his eyes, waiting for him to correct her, to laugh it off. But he didn't. He just smiled, as if it were perfectly natural. After the guests left, after Cassie slipped into the night with her designer handbag and her satisfied smile, I tried to bring it up. "Don't you think she's a little much?" I asked cautiously. Eric chuckled, shrugging. "She's just lonely, Autumn. Don't take it so seriously. It's not like she means anything by it." I bit my tongue. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was nothing. But each time she came back, my unease grew. And then I started noticing her things. At first, it was a pair of slippers tucked near the door. I assumed she'd forgotten them. Then a towel hanging in the bathroom, soft and expensive, nothing like the ones I had bought. When I asked Eric, he shrugged again. She probably just left them here by accident. But the accidents kept piling up. A light fixture she had ordered online, delivered to our address. Makeup wipes on the sink. A silk robe draped over the back of a chair. Piece by piece, Cassie was leaving her mark on the place Eric and I had fought so hard to build. Every corner that once felt like ours began to feel like hers. And no matter how tightly I tried to hold onto the life Eric and I had created, it was as if Cassie was weaving herself into the fabric of it, strand by strand, until I could no longer tell where my marriage ended and she began. It didn't take long before Cassie stopped acting like a guest altogether. She began to behave as though our apartment was hers to manage, hers to arrange, hers to control. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Eric and Cassie standing shoulder to shoulder, studying the sofa as if it were a problem to be solved. "You know, Eric," she said, her voice light and teasing, "this couch would look so much better against that wall. It opens the space, lets the light in." And before I could say a word, Eric was already helping her drag the furniture across the floor. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood, my protests drowned out by their laughter when the new placement didn't quite fit. "It's fine," Cassie giggled. "We'll figure it out." "We?" The word echoed in my head. Since when did Cassie have a say in our furniture in our home? I stood there, arms crossed, watching as they adjusted the angle, both smiling, both so sure this was perfectly normal. Another week, I came home to find the light fixture in the dining room gone, replaced by something sleeker, brighter. Cassie's style, not mine. When I asked about it, Eric shrugged casually. Cassie thought it would bring more warmth to the space. She ordered it. I installed it. She ordered it. My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. Eric, this is our home, not hers. He sighed, brushing me off. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? She's just trying to help. Help. That word felt like poison. It didn't stop there. She moved through our kitchen as if she owned it, pulling spices from shelves, directing Eric on how to season meat, laughing when I stood silently in the doorway. She criticized the way I arranged plates, the color of the curtains, even the smell of the candles I lit in the evenings. And somehow, Eric always listened to her, as though her opinion carried more weight than mine. Every time I spoke up, I was met with that same dismissive smile from Eric. You're overthinking this, Autumn. You're jealous. That's all. Jealous. The word cut me in ways I can't even describe. I wasn't jealous. I was being erased. Day by day, Cassie replaced me in my own home, and Eric acted as though my discomfort was nothing more than petty envy. The tension finally broke one night after dinner. Cassie had once again stayed late, her laughter filling the apartment long after I wanted her gone. When she finally left, I turned to Eric, my voice shaking. This has to stop. She's in our home too much. She's crossing boundaries, Eric. We need to set limits. He stared at me, irritation flashing in his eyes. Why are you so dramatic? She's lonely, Autumn. She's been through so much. Why can't you just be kind? Kind. My voice cracked. Kind is one thing. But this isn't kindness. This is her taking over our lives. Eric shook his head, muttering under his breath. You're just jealous. And with that single word, he shut me out. My feelings dismissed, my marriage minimized to nothing more than insecurity. That night, lying awake in the darkness, I realized something terrifying. I no longer felt a home in the life I had built. I was a stranger in my own apartment, watching another woman redraw the lines of my marriage while my husband held the pen. It was a Saturday evening when the illusion finally shattered. I had been running errands all afternoon, the drizzle soaking through my coat as I carried bags of groceries up the stairs. When I unlocked the door to our apartment, the smell hit me first, garlic, onions, something rich simmering on the stove. For a fleeting second, I thought Eric had surprised me with dinner. But then I walked into the kitchen. There she was, Cassie. She stood at the counter in one of my aprons, my apron, tied snugly around her waist as she stirred a pot like she had been doing it for years. Her hair was tied back, her sleeves rolled up, as if this were her kitchen, her life. Eric stood beside her, laughing at something she had said, chopping vegetables while she leaned close enough to whisper into his ear. The sight froze me where I stood. My bag slipped from my hands, apples rolling across the floor. Cassie turned, startled for only a second before her smile returned, warm and casual, as though this were perfectly normal. Oh, Autumn, she chirped. We thought we'd surprise you. Eric and I decided to cook tonight. You work so hard. You deserve a break. A break. From my own kitchen. My chest burned, fury rising faster than I could contain it. Take off that apron, I snapped. Get out of my house. Her smile faltered, her eyes wide as she glanced at Eric. He stepped forward, setting down the knife, his voice calm, patronizing. Autumn, relax. She's just helping. Why are you so upset? Upset? My voice cracked, louder now. She's in our kitchen, Eric. She's wearing my things, cooking in my home as if she owns it. I want this to stop. Do you hear me? I want it to stop. You're not welcome here anymore, Cassie. Cassie's lip trembled, and suddenly she was no longer the confident, glamorous woman who had barged into our lives. She became the victim, her eyes filling with tears as she dropped the spoon with a clatter. I didn't mean to upset you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I just wanted to help. I'm alone, Autumn. I don't have anyone. I thought we were friends. Before I could answer, Eric moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't cry, Cassie. She didn't mean it like that. He glared at me as if I had struck her. God, Autumn, do you realize how cruel you sound? She's lonely, and you're treating her like some kind of intruder. My laugh was sharp, bitter. Because she is an intruder. Can't you see what's happening? She's replacing me in our life, and you're letting her. But Eric didn't flinch. He pulled Cassie closer, his eyes cold. You're overreacting. You're jealous, and it's ugly. You should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed. The word landed like a knife. My anger curdled into something heavier, something that sank into my chest until I could barely breathe. I turned away before they could see the tears forming in my eyes. That night, I lay awake in bed while Eric stayed up comforting her in the living room. I could hear their low voices through the door, his words meant for her, not for me. I realized then that something had broken beyond repair. And yet, I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I told myself this was a storm we could survive, that if I held on tightly enough, if I fought hard enough, maybe I could win back what was slipping through my fingers. But deep down, I think I already knew. My marriage was no longer mine. It was late afternoon when I saw them. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind of gray that promised rain but hadn't yet delivered. I had been walking home from the market, a paper bag of groceries cradled in my arms, when I passed by a cafe I didn't usually notice. Through the wide window I saw him, Eric. He sat at a small corner table, leaning in close, his hand resting on top of hers. Cassie's laugh carried even through the glass, her head tilted back, her manicured nails glinting as she squeezed his fingers. And then, before I could convince myself I was imagining it, he leaned forward and kissed her. Soft, easy, like it was something they had done many times before. The world around me went silent. My knees weakened, and the groceries slipped slightly in my arms. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stand there, frozen, as the truth I had tried so hard to deny stared back at me from behind the pane of glass. I told myself to turn away, to walk home, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. My feet carried me forward, through the door, the bell above it chiming as I stepped inside. They didn't notice me at first. They were too wrapped up in each other, their voices low and intimate. Then Cassie spotted me. Instead of shame or guilt, her lips curved into a smirk. She squeezed Eric's hand tighter and said, loud enough for me to hear, I want him as my birthday gift. Eric didn't protest. He didn't laugh or recoil. He just sat there, letting her words hang in the air between us. My heart shattered. I dropped the bag of groceries, apples rolling across the cafe floor, milk seeping from the cracked carton. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, more to myself than to them, it's over. Cassie leaned back, satisfied, her eyes glinting with victory. Eric looked at me, but there was no remorse in his gaze, only a kind of resignation, as if he had already chosen his side long before this moment. I stumbled out of the cafe, the bell chiming again, cruelly cheerful against the devastation inside me. The rain finally began to fall, cold drops soaking through my hair, my clothes, mixing with the tears streaming down my face. I walked aimlessly, the city a blur of neon and gray, my body trembling as if it couldn't contain the weight of my grief. On the sidewalk, I stopped, clutching at the brick wall of a building just to stay upright. My chest ached, each breath sharp, ragged. Strangers passed, umbrellas raised, their lives untouched by mine, while mine had just crumbled into pieces at my feet. That night, lying in bed alone, I replayed the scene over and over until it became unbearable. The kiss, her words, his silence, each memory another knife twisting deeper. I had fought so hard to hold on to my marriage, convinced myself that if I endured, if I forgave, if I stayed, things might go back to the way they were. But now I knew. My marriage hadn't just cracked. It had collapsed completely, and all that was left was the wreckage. The papers came on a Tuesday morning. A manila envelope slid under the door, my name scrawled in Eric's handwriting on the front. Inside was the petition for divorce. No conversation, no attempt at explanation. Just cold legal language outlining the end of our marriage. What cut the deepest wasn't even his silence. It was the line that demanded the division of property, the apartment we had chosen together, furnished together, built a life in together. Because it had been purchased during the marriage, it was considered shared, which meant I couldn't keep it, not on my own. When I confronted him, hoping for even a flicker of the man I had once loved, he just shrugged. It's fair, Autumn. You'll get your half. That's how these things work. Fair. The word made me sick. Nothing about this was fair. I had poured my soul into that apartment, every paycheck, every late-night meal on the floor before we had furniture, every laugh, every kiss. And now it was reduced to a transaction, a piece of property to be divided. Packing was torture. Every object I touched seemed to carry the ghost of a memory. The couch where we had fallen asleep watching movies. The dishes we had chosen at the flea market. The curtains I had hung on a sunny Sunday afternoon. Each item became unbearable, a reminder of what had been stolen from me. I wrapped them carefully in newspaper, my hands trembling, tears dripping onto the ink until it smeared. It felt like burying fragments of my life, sealing them into boxes that would never open the same way again. On the final day, I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The apartment looked so much smaller without our things. I touched the walls one last time, whispering goodbye to a home that had never betrayed me, even if the man inside it had. Then I locked the door and left the keys on the counter, my heart breaking all over again. I moved back in with my mother, Patty. She welcomed me without judgment, her arms strong around me, her voice steady when mine shook. But even her presence couldn't fill the hollow ache inside. At night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had collapsed so quickly. The future I had built was gone, and I had no idea what came next. And then, just as I thought I couldn't fall any lower, I felt it, a subtle nausea in the mornings, a heaviness that wouldn't leave. I brushed it off at first, blaming stress. But when the day stretched on, I bought a test, my hands shaking as I waited for the result. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. I sank to the bathroom floor, the test clutched in my hand, tears streaming down my face. I was carrying his child, the child of the man who had betrayed me, abandoned me, taken everything from me. But as the sobs quieted, another feeling began to stir beneath the grief, a flicker of purpose, a reason to keep going. My marriage was over, my home was gone, but inside me was something worth holding on to. When I told my mother the truth, I expected disappointment, maybe even fear. Instead, she simply took my hands in hers, her eyes steady. "This child is a gift, Autumn," she said softly. "Don't think of him as a tie to Eric. Think of him as yours. Yours to love, yours to raise, yours to build a new life around." Her words settled something inside me. I had been terrified of raising a baby alone, of facing the judgment of others, of collapsing under the weight of responsibility. But with my mother's unwavering support, fear slowly began to shift into resolve. Pregnancy was not easy. My body changed in ways I hadn't expected. The nausea, the exhaustion, the restless nights, all of it pressed down on me. But each flutter in my belly, each tiny kick, reminded me that I wasn't just carrying Eric's betrayal inside me. I was carrying hope, a future, a reason to keep going. I began to plan. At first, it was small things, making lists, sorting through baby clothes my mother had saved from years ago, repainting the spare room in soft shades of cream and blue. But soon, I started to think about more than survival. I thought about independence, about stability, about creating a world where my child would never feel the uncertainty I had lived through. When my son was born, I held him against my chest, his tiny cries filling the hospital room, and I knew my mother had been right. He wasn't a reminder of loss, he was my salvation. I named him Matthew, a name that meant gift of God. And that's exactly what he was. Caring for him was exhausting, especially in those first months. Sleepless nights blurred into endless days, each feeding and diaper change a challenge. But instead of feeling trapped, I felt anchored. Matthew gave me focus. He gave me something to fight for. I knew I couldn't rely on my mother forever. I needed to build something of my own. That's when I turned back to an old skill I had nearly forgotten, sewing. As a teenager, I had made my own dresses, patched clothes for friends, experimented with fabrics late into the night. Now, with Matthew napping beside me, I began again. At first, it was simple repairs for neighbors, hemming pants, mending seams. But word spread quickly. Soon, women from the neighborhood were bringing me fabric, asking me to make dresses for weddings, jackets for work, costumes for school plays. With each stitch, I stitched myself back together. It wasn't easy. Money was tight. There were days when I wanted to give up, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. But every time I looked at Matthew's sleeping face, I found the strength to keep going. My mother helped when she could, rocking him to sleep while I bent over the sewing machine, but the work was mine. The business was mine. Eventually, I rented a small storefront on a quiet street, painting the walls a soft cream and hanging my first designs in the window. I called it Atelier Autumn. The name felt like a declaration that I had survived, that I was creating something new. The first few months were slow. Some days no one walked in at all. But then a bride came to me in tears, her dress ruined by another tailor, and I saved it in time for her wedding. She told everyone she knew. After that, more clients came, their trust building my reputation one garment at a time. Life began to steady. My heart still carried scars, but they no longer bled. I would walk into the atelier each morning with Matthew in a stroller by my side and feel a quiet pride. We had lost so much, but we were building something stronger in its place. It was the beginning of healing, the start of a life that was truly mine. The first time I met Jonathan Hayes, I thought of him only as another customer. He walked into my atelier on a rainy Thursday afternoon, his suit jacket draped over one arm, the faint smell of rain clinging to him. He was tall, with kind eyes that seemed out of place on his otherwise serious face. I need a suit altered, he said, his voice steady but polite. I've got an important event coming up, and nothing off the rack ever seems to fit me right. I nodded, motioning him toward the fitting room. At that point, clients were clients. I didn't look at men and see possibilities anymore. I had stopped believing in them the day Eric signed the divorce papers. But Jonathan came back. Not just once, but again and again. At first, it was excuses, another jacket, another pair of pants. Then, he started stopping by just to ask how business was going. Sometimes he bought Matthew a cookie from the bakery across the street, presenting it with an awkward smile that made my heart soften despite myself. It was subtle, the way he found his way into our lives. One day he offered to fix the squeaky hinge on the atelier door. Another day he carried bolts of fabric up the stairs for me. When Matthew was fussy, Jonathan knelt down, making silly faces until the baby's cries turned into laughter. I had grown cautious, wary of letting anyone in. But with Jonathan, it didn't feel like a performance. He wasn't trying to sweep me off my feet. He was simply there, steady, patient, reliable. And little by little, I found myself looking forward to the sound of the bell above the atelier door when he walked in. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Seattle's rain gave way to brief flashes of summer sun, then back again. And somewhere in that rhythm, I realized I trusted him. Not blindly, not like I once had with Eric, but with the quiet confidence that comes from watching someone prove themselves in small, consistent ways. When Jonathan asked me out for the first time, I almost said no. Fear still clung to me, the memory of betrayal never fully gone. But he smiled gently and said, "It doesn't have to mean anything more than dinner, Autumn. Just dinner." and I agreed. Dinner turned into long walks. Walks turned into weekends spent together. Matthew adored him, clinging to his hand, calling his name. Seeing them together lit something inside me I hadn't felt in years. A sense of home, not tied to walls or mortgages, but to people. 2 years after that first alteration, Jonathan proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture. No flash, no audience. Just the three of us in the atelier late at night. Matthew asleep in the stroller, Jonathan holding out a simple ring. I don't just want to love you, Autumn. I want to build with you. I want to raise him with you. Let me be part of your family. I said yes. Our wedding was small, intimate. My mother cried. Matthew clapped and laughed when I walked down the aisle. Jonathan looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and for the first time in a long time, I believed in forever again. But life has a way of circling back. One afternoon, years later, Eric appeared at the atelier. His hair was grayer, his eyes tired, but the arrogance was still there. He stared at Matthew, now a bright, lively little boy with Jonathan's mannerisms, and something shifted in his face. Recognition. He's mine, Eric whispered, almost in awe. He's my son. I stood tall, my hand steady, even as old pain threatened to resurface. Jonathan was by my side, calm and silent, a pillar of strength. I looked Eric in the eye and spoke the truth I had carried for years. He already has a real father. Eric flinched, as if struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, words failing him for the first time in his life. He left without another word, the door swinging shut behind him. I turned back to Jonathan, to Matthew, to the life we had built together. My past no longer had the power to define me. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the collapse, they were chapters in my story, but they weren't the ending. The ending was this: a family born not of perfection, but of resilience. A love forged not from illusions, but from truth. A future built not on borrowed dreams, but on the strength I had found in myself. For the first time I felt free,